Okay, I'll make the assumption that the recording is happening. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tony Voss. Welcome to this Tuesday PM Pipeline Industries Guild webinar with Chris Train, who will be presenting on the subject of gas turning green. But before we start, and before I hand over to Chris, I need to go through some housekeeping. In this case, it's virtual meeting housekeeping. So, can I please ask that everyone's camera is turned off, because it does chew into the bandwidth and sometimes makes the calls delay and skip slightly. Can I ask that all microphones are muted as well, please? If there is an alarm of any kind during the presentation, it's in your house, not mine or Chris's, so you need to do whatever you must. Also remind everyone that as we go through this presentation, there's a Q&A function on the chat for this Zoom call. Do please put questions on there as we go along, and what I'll do towards the end, if there's not many questions, I'll ask all of the questions to Chris if we've got time. If there are a lot of questions, I'll pick a selection of relevant ones that give a broad spectrum of views, and then we'll deal with all those, all the questions that were unanswered later on via email or via the PIG facilities. This is also being recorded, so it'll be dumped onto the YouTube channel for the Pipeline Industries Guild. So, by way of a brief introduction, I met Chris in the 90s, I think it was, in Transco, as it was then, in the Network Development Department, when natural gas was aplenty. We didn't have a Climate Change Act, and the majority of new energy infrastructure was fossil fuel based. Now, a great deal has obviously changed since then. We do now have a Climate Change Act with a 2050 net zero target. In some cases, some industries are accelerating that to a 2030 target in some cases. The transmission and distribution networks are now challenged with meeting carbon budgets. They're needing to keep the gas flowing whilst aiming for net zero and transforming themselves into low carbon networks. And there's also a huge amount of innovation happening and funding in play, including from Ofgem. Now, the reason I'm briefly hosting and introducing this with Chris is I did hear Chris deliver this presentation to an organisation fairly recently, and I thought it'd be very, very relevant for the Guild, even though it is gas-centric. So with that, Chris, I'm not going to tease anybody any longer. I'm just going to pass the baton across to you. Like I say, can you please record your Q&A on the chat function as we go along, and we'll deal with that towards the end. Chris, over to you.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Tony, and thank you very much, Case, also for this opportunity to share some thoughts this afternoon. So, gas goes green, delivering the pathway to net zero. The time for action has never been greater. The climate emergency is now upon us. And I think if you were ever in any doubt at just look at the impact of the reduced consumption during lockdown and what that did in terms of the local environment. So Gas Goes Green brings together the expertise from the UK's 5 gas network operators, building on the foundations of our existing infrastructure innovation projects and the wider scientific community. The pathway delivering net zero in the most cost-effective and least disruptive way possible. So, there we go. So how I'm going to do that, I'm going to talk about a bit about our sector and then the net zero challenge, Gas Goes Green and the pathway to net zero, our opportunity as an industry to provide solutions, and then I'm going to finish off with Q&A, which will be ably facilitated by Tony. So, engineering net zero. As an industry, we have a long and proud history providing service and societal changes and developments for over 200 years. Even in my own short career of 37 years, I've been part of huge change in the sector, both politically, organisationally and regulatory, but particularly with respect to our position in the energy market. Everyone is familiar with the move to power generation in the 1990s, But at the same time, there was a domestic revolution occurring. When I started, around 20% of homes had gas central heating, and most houses heated just one room with either a coal fire or paraffin heater, for those that remember paraffin. But today, 84% of homes are heated by gas. And through that period, we have provided excellent service and an excellent safety record, something to be incredibly proud of. But I think the bit that I am proud of is how the industry strives for continual improvement over that period and over that time.
Chris, can I just interrupt? If you're changing
You
the slides, we're not seeing the slides change. If you're changing them, we're still seeing
I am changing. I'm seeing them change nicely on. There's that. I wonder what's gone wrong there. Can you see that better, Tony?
I can, yeah. Can you just run the presentation, Chris? Would that be better? All we're seeing is your draft. We can see all the slides down the side.
Yeah, so, hold on. You can see the slides down the side. Can you see the main slide?
Yeah, we can see the drafts in the left margin. It's okay if you do that manually. That will work.
Let's do that, and we'll see how we get on. So many of you will have seen these charts before, but I do think they represent that challenge and opportunity very well. And I'm going to just highlight a couple of things with respect to that. Gas delivers approximately 4 times more energy than the electricity network at peak. And secondly, we've made good progress on decarbonisation of electricity generation. And in those early days of renewables at scale, I ran the electricity transmission control network. And a lot of clever people rose to the challenges of integration at that time. And today, and we've seen that through lockdown, we've seen records for renewables surpassed almost on a monthly basis. But we still have to make progress on heat, industry, transport, and that is our opportunity. So the business plans constructed by the networks for the next RIO period, which starts April 2021, target to reduce emissions by 9 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalents by the end of the period. But more importantly, it's critical in terms of the timing to set us on the pathway to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. I think there is a real danger with respect to waiting. So setting the target last year has been very profound call to action. The previous target of 80% allowed organisations to hide that somebody else will achieve that reduction. Net zero is quite different, nowhere to hide. So the need for action has never been greater. And ensuring that homes and businesses across the UK are connected to the world's first net zero carbon gas network is one of the best ways that we can take that action. And the opportunity, as I say, is to start from now. So working together as an industry, under Gas Goes Green, the 5 networks, along with the Energy Network Association, have come together as a sector and set out a set of principles by which the programme is developed and founded. And the first one of those is that among the general public, businesses, investors, and across political parties, there's a strong support for net zero. The second is that there's no silver bullet in achieving this, gas or electric. It requires a smart whole system approach. And there's no realistic scenario for delivering net zero without hydrogen. And those that follow these areas closely will have seen that National Grid's ESO has produced its future energy scenarios for this year. this week, and you will see that dramatic change from the previous scenarios, where hydrogen has become a fundamental part of the mix in terms of achieving net zero, and particularly in the scenarios where they want to achieve net zero early. And we've made good progress, I think, as a sector, and there's an opportunity for us to grab that global leadership. Although other areas, and you'll have seen many announcements within Europe about the community in Europe and also the nations in Europe making big announcements about big investments in hydrogen as part of their net zero economy. And I think, you know, particularly now as we come out of the COVID-19 situation, it demonstrates that action is necessary quickly to have a healthy industry and a healthy economy. And working with government on policy requirements is a critical part of the Gas Goes Green initiative. So the critical bit, I think, as well, is that ability to provide customers with choice, with increased resilience, and particularly minimizing the cost of disruption. And delivering for customers and stakeholders, the networks play a key role in delivering. The networks did a piece of work as part of the price control with Accent Market Research, and stakeholders emphasised the need for urgency, and they want more collaboration between networks driving innovation and the continuation of options testing and providing evidence. And this was reinforced with each of the individual networks customer groups, and creating that opportunity to develop regional plans. And again, you may have seen last week that Cadent, along with Electricity Northwest, produced a net zero plan for Greater Manchester on a collaborative basis, demonstrating the need for electricity and gas to work together. So a whole system approach is required, and there's no realistic net zero scenario by 2050 that does not involve clean gas and increased electrification. It needs hydrogen and the repurposing of the gas network, the most efficient, least cost and least disruptive for customers. We need to act now, and this is a big task, 21 million homes. And actually it's a much bigger task for those that hark back to the conversion from town gas. When you look at that, how embedded the gas networks are in terms of our requirement for heat. Blue hydrogen, as it's called, through steam methane reforming and carbon capture, utilisation and storage are required initially to deliver hydrogen at scale. Green hydrogen will develop as the electricity renewable capacity grows to deliver better load factors for that electricity and drive down the cost of green hydrogen. We see this starting through industrial clusters and delivering for industry, giving economies of scale and retaining and developing skilled employment. And then broader connectivity and the delivery of economy of scope across the networks will deliver efficiencies over time. And we need to build capacity in the supply chain. And that is particularly important, I think, for the Pipeline Industries Guild to be part of that delivering against those opportunities for repurposing and delivering a more integrated network. Hydrogen is very much in the news at the moment. You get the press cuttings through and lots of discussion around how we might travel, how we might heat our homes, and how we might cook our food. I remember the first time I came across the discussions of hydrogen was back in the late 1970s when I was at university, and they were talking about the hydrogen economy. Is this another cycle of hype? I don't think so. And the Committee for Climate Change say it's crucial in order to meet our objectives. The hydrogen economy is how we make the most of that hard to abate sectors. Demand variations and energy storage, it offers critical solutions for that. The pressure on our electricity networks, as I say, gas networks deliver 4 times as much energy as electricity networks at peak. But by creating that smart coupling of the opportunity, we deliver better options for customers and customer choice. A whole system approach will drive a smart economic solution, and think system, not just linear thinking, because the opportunity here is to drive value through systemic thinking. So we put together the program, and it draws on the knowledge and expertise and applies that to the opportunity. We've organized ourselves in 6 work streams: investing in net zero, delivering the cost optimal routes to net zero; gas quality and safety, ensuring safe transportation of the product; consumer options, looking at smarter delivery; system enhancements, revising the system and processes; the transformation, hydrogen transformation, transitioning to delivering net zero; and communications and stakeholder engagement, because without customers understanding their needs and the options in order to meet those needs, we won't be delivering a solution. So we set up something called the Gas Goes Green Advisory Group to set up stakeholder input into the program, and we will share through that advisory group the progress of the individual work streams and how that comes together. Earlier this month, we ran a workshop with the engineering organisations on moving Gas Safety Management Regulation Schedule 2 into an industry standard, and that is a great enabler for moving the hydrogen agenda forward. So this slide covers just actually a small, but probably the better known projects that we as the networks have been undertaking. This is all about amassing the evidence that allows us to repurpose the networks and deliver that hydrogen network and that hydrogen economy. So we started this program and this process back in 2016 with the H21 City Gates project, which was about demonstrating the feasibility of developing the infrastructure end-to-end to deliver a hydrogen network and repurpose the gas network in Leeds. And that was completed 2016. It shows you, I think, how long it takes actually for these things to gather the momentum and gather the initiative. There have been a number of other H21 projects building on that since. The H100 project up in Fife is about building an end-to-end supply chain through a wind farm, an electrolyzer to produce the hydrogen, and then delivering that hydrogen to somewhere in the region of 300 homes up there in Fife. High deploy is about we can put up to 20% hydrogen blend into the current network without changing consumers' appliances, which gives us the opportunity to start to build the infrastructure, start to make an impact on the carbon footprint of heat, and start that transition and that transformation. HyNet is a project that looks at the industry in the northwest. It looks at carbon capture, utilisation and storage with a depleted field. There's already hydrogen production through industry up there in the northwest, so building, creating that, and that creates a number of options then about how you grow the network. from those initial industrial customers in the Northwest. And then high NTS is about how we build the backbone infrastructure in terms of delivering that transition over time. As I say, this is just a small example of, and if you go onto the E&A website, you can get more information on each of these projects and the broader set of projects that are being undertaken by the networks. This is about gathering the body of evidence that then leads to the transition. So through the RIIO-2 process, this has led to the networks delivering a carbon commitment, which you can see there on the screen. It might be a bit small, but I wanted to highlight, as part of the H21, we've done some work with Leeds Beckett University, and they've done research and focus groups on hydrogen and the implementation in hydrogen. And it led me to be thinking about the example in electricity, and I've worked in electricity as well as gas, but in electricity, there's the principle of the path of least resistance. Electrons find that path of least resistance, and if you do anything in electricity, you understand that concept. That concept goes broader, actually, into behavioral science. And the path of least resistance for 84% of customers is actually to repurpose the gas network for hydrogen and repurpose the gas boiler in the home for hydrogen. And one of the policy things that we've been looking at championing is to create hydrogen-ready boilers and mandate those in the same way that condensing boilers were mandated through the 90s. And by doing that, you can transition to hydrogen, the hydrogen economy, much simpler. So as part of the RIIO-2 process, we're continuing to work with the regulator, with Ofgem, on delivering these demonstrations and working with BEIS and the government around how that then fits into the net zero pathway and the energy mix. And last week, the BEIS, Kwasi Kwarteng, the energy minister, set up the Hydrogen Advisory Council, which is another great step forward at starting the process of setting out the hydrogen strategy for the hydrogen economy for us here in the UK. So I've sort of rattled through that quite quickly on the basis that we're keeping to quite a tight agenda. And I did want to give the opportunity for questions and the ability to do that. Any questions that we don't manage to answer in the period, I will make sure that I've given some response when this all comes back together. So Tony, I'm handing back to you.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much for that presentation. Really insightful, really interesting, very, very relevant. Just remind everyone that those slides in this recording will be on the YouTube channel for the Pipeline Industries Guild. There have been some questions coming, Chris, so I'm going to go through them from top down. The first question relates to funding for these initiatives for gas turning green. What do you think will be the primary funding sources for the net carbon journey, not just hydrogen, but biomethane as well?
Yeah, biomethane and, of course, heat pumps and any other source of technology. And I think, this is one of the critical points about being able to demonstrate how you drive efficiencies into the supply chain over time. We produced a report last month, which we did with KPMG, which demonstrates the cost of hydrogen to customers as you develop over time, using the example of the offshore wind networks, about how you drive those efficiencies in the supply chain. And I remember, again, I was running Wokingham at the time. The government set the offshore wind agenda. Offshore wind was £130 a megawatt. They set the ambitious drive to get the cost down to £100 a megawatt, and it's currently £39 a megawatt. And demonstrating that pathway to efficiencies in the supply chain, I think, is quite crucial, because there's a tendency to focus on the cost differentials as they stand at the moment. And of course, producing hydrogen is at the moment more expensive than burning methane. Not much more expensive than producing electricity when you look at the whole cost. And the important thing is to be able to demonstrate the investments in the electricity network, as well as the investments in the gas network for repurposing. So there is a need to drive those implementation costs in the short term. And depending which part of the supply chain you're in will depend how they are funded, whether it's directly or indirectly through regulation. But ultimately, of course, we all as customers pay for this transition to net zero.
So a question that came slightly further down the list, Chris, but it's relevant to what we're at the top, is, do you think Ofgem's draft determination has helped?
So I think my perspective on that would be, yes, overall it has helped, because I think Ofgem have recognised the need to invest in the gas networks as well as the electricity networks in terms of their ambition to meet net zero. And if you go back to Ofgem's announcement back in January, when Jonathan Brearley took charge, their road to net zero was very electricity centric. So I think there's a recognition of that balance. I think that's a recognition about how far we have come. However, it also demonstrates that actually there's a lot of work still to be done. And the draft determinations in terms of achieving net zero, not just across the gas networks, but across the electricity transmission networks, demonstrates that we still need a lot to be done. And the way that this process works, of course, which sort of reverts to the previous question, is government need to set a policy framework. If the government set the policy framework, then the regulator can set the regulatory framework, and then you've got the basis by which investors can invest into the new technology, whether that is midstream, upstream, or downstream with the customer.
Okay, the next few questions, Chris, are relating to the CO2 that is produced from the blue hydrogen agenda. What's your view on the likelihood of that CO2 that's sequestrated staying in the ground? And is there any opportunity for upcycling it, i.e. through some circular economy?
So both good questions. In terms of sequestration, of course, the oil sector has been sequestering CO2 for decades. And therefore we have a lot of knowledge around the geology and the structures around that sequestration. It is required to be done on a professional, comprehensive basis. And I was involved in the work with National Grid when we looked at the White Rose project, and we did exploration of the saline aquifers off the East Coast. So it is a subject I can get slightly nerdy on, but I have every confidence that it will, that we have the technology and the ability to ensure that the CO2 remains sequestered. The circular economy piece, I think the more that can come forward in terms of utilising the CO2 as opposed to putting it in the ground, absolutely the better. It is better that if we could use it. At the moment, there isn't technology of scale that allows that, but hopefully, again, that challenge to the engineers and scientists will bring forward solutions. But I think it's important that So the way we see the blue hydrogen working is that in order to drive scale early, you need blue hydrogen. Biomethane sits in that in terms of it creating negative CO2. So that helps offset some of the efficiency challenges with CCUS. But over time, as that electricity capacity grows, then there will be more and more green hydrogen, and I see the cost of that green hydrogen, as I say, very much come down. I'm up here on the East Coast at the moment, and I cannot believe how the landscape, as you look out to sea, has changed dramatically in the last 6 months as they're building the Hornsey wind farm offshore.
Thanks, Chris. The next couple of questions you've already addressed. There was one about repurposing the networks to transport captured CO2. You've talked about that. And the other question was about the role of biomethane. Is there anything else you want to add on either of those?
So it's very, biomethane, as an industry, we've put a lot of effort in, and it is great. And as we transition to the future, we will be creating biomethane networks as opposed to blended networks, which is what we're doing with biomethane at the moment. And that will create lots of opportunity. I think, and certainly if you look at the Pathways report on the ENA website, biomethane has a very important role in terms of our overall delivery of net zero.
Okay, Chris, the next question relates to the calorific value of hydrogen, i.e. it's lower than its the volume equivalent of natural gas. So do you think there's enough capacity in the current networks to go hydrogen?
So that's a great challenge to have. There is no doubt the calorific value is lower. With all plastic networks, you can run at a higher pressure, which will be helpful in terms of increasing that capacity. And I don't see all of the 84% of the homes that currently burn natural gas transitioning to hydrogen. I do see there is a role for electricity and electric heat pumps. Have we got enough capacity is a good question. At the moment, we've got plenty of capacity. But as we drive the future, we will drive a different looking network, I think.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Next question relates to dedicated hydrogen pipelines. It's a question that just points out that in Canada, they already exist, dedicated lines. Yeah. Do you see that appearing in the UK?
Yeah, so I talked about industrial clusters, and I do see hydrogen as essential to heavy industry. The progress that we've made in terms of our national carbon footprint has largely been at the expense of heavy industry. So I think the important thing is, as we go through this next transition, is to be able to support industry and not just offshore it and move the carbon footprint to another part of the world. So driving those clusters, delivering the hydrogen economy for industry allows you then to develop the wider heat economy. So there will be a combination of new hydrogen pipelines and repurposing existing hydrogen pipelines. But I think as you move down the heat line, the repurposing the existing distribution infrastructure really gives you that opportunity to minimize that disruption and deliver the best value for customers to heat their homes.
Okay. The last couple of questions now, Chris, it's a two-part question. First part is, do we need an Olympics delivery authority approach to get ourselves to net zero? And what's your view on peaking plants, which are taking gas right now?
Yeah, both very good questions. So do we need a delivery authority approach? I think we do, and in some respects, bays have started to develop that thought and that approach around. But I do think if we are going to achieve net zero in the timelines, I think solutions should be driven up by local economies. I was involved in in a discussion about the National Heat Development Association based in Tyseley. Tyseley is in Birmingham. There's a waste heat plant run by Veolia. So there's an opportunity for district heating. They're building hydrogen production capability. So that delivers as well. And there's strong electricity infrastructure from industry that was previously in the vicinity. And I think for me that demonstrates actually you need all of those approaches in terms of delivery. People in London don't know what the environment in Tyseley looks like. So I think you have to drive local solutions. So I think it is a delivery authority approach. So you understand from a national level, but building up the solutions from local. The peaking plant, I think, is very interesting in that I obviously still look at what's happening on the electricity network. And there's been a lot of announcements around the scale of renewables through the lockdown period because of the change in energy mix and in terms of demand. But there have also been days where gas has provided 75% of the daily requirements. It is important that we have that ability to manage peak demand, and that's through storage opportunity. But hydrogen, I think, helps, again, part of that whole system approach of whether it's hydrogen-fired turbines or it's hydrogen storage to manage the flow of the electricity demand. So, but ultimately, we need to get the natural gas peaking plants not part of that energy mix in terms of delivering our balanced system requirements. And I think increasingly, the role of data and delivering smart networks will allow us to have smart generation and smart demand and bring that all together.
Chris, thank you very much for that. I'm not at all surprised that we've had some fantastic questions come through on this subject. It's very relevant. Everyone's very interested in it, and some really good answers. Chris, so thank you very much for your time delivering the presentation and addressing those questions. We do have just a quick update for some webinars that are due to come in. On the 30th of July, Cubis are presenting a webinar which is being hosted by the Irish branch. And on the 4th of August, Decatech are also presenting a webinar which is being hosted by the Utilities panel. So I think that's it for now, unless Kate or Catherine, you want to add anything else to wrap up, but that's all the material Chris and I were going to go through.
No, thank you for hosting that for us, Chris. Much appreciated. And Tony, thank you for your time as well. So.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for joining the call.
Thank you.